Structure your board portfolio career across the life cycle of companies. Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series, the podcast for chairs, CEOs, non-executive directors, company secretaries, and their advisors. Each episode is filled with practical insights from inside boardrooms and highlights actions you can take to strengthen the performance of your board and enhance your board career. I'm Dr. Sabine Dembkowski, founder and managing partner of Better Boards. We make the boards of the most ambitious organizations more effective. In this podcast, I will talk with Susanne Chishti. She is chair of the FINTECH Circle, Europe's first fintech-focused investor network and innovation platform, and a non-executive director in various organizations. Why should you listen? Well, don't just focus when you build your board career on the listed organizations. There is a whole world out there of private companies, startups, scale-ups, companies that are at a pre-IPO stage. They require different skills to support them. It's different to add value to a listed organization than to a startup or a scale-up. And this is part of the discussion. How can you add value? What makes a board role exciting in different stages of the life cycle of a company? And maybe it sparks some ideas how you can enhance your board portfolio. Susanne, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thanks so much, Sabine, for having me.
It's an exciting topic, as so many people out there who listen to the podcast are actually searching to enhance their portfolio career. So let's really dive into this. If you think about the different life cycles of a company, and you particularly see this in the fintech environment where you are very active, different skills are really needed at different stages of an organization's life cycle. And let's explore a bit what mindset, skills, and experience should board members really bring to the table for a startup, scale-up, and an organization that is at a pre-IPO stage. Maybe we start right with a startup.
Yes, I mean, that's a great question, Sabine. And I would say when you are on the board of a startup and advise a startup CEO or the team, the founders within the startup ecosystem, normally startups have got two goals. The first one is to find customers in order to prove that their product has so-called product market fit. And customers are willing to pay for it, the amounts which the startup has envisioned. And the second goal is normally fundraising. And of course, the more you sell, the easier fundraising gets. So as an advisor at this stage, it is very helpful if you can be more practical and more really helping the entrepreneurs to either help open doors, using your own network in finding potential partnerships, customers, or just helping them with a go-to-market strategy. Or on the second side, if you are connected to potential investor networks, angel investor groups, where you can open doors as well for the CEO and his or her team.
Great. And if we move now to the scale-up stage?
At scale-ups, we define them normally with revenues, with annual recurring revenues of more than £1 million. So at this stage, they have proven their product market fit, customers buying the products repeatedly, and now they're moving into the stage of venture capital if they start to raise bigger rounds. And so once the VCs come in, governance becomes more important because, of course, a venture capital fund is there for a limited period of time and they want to exit within 5 to 7 years, which means time is of essence to really create value and make the company worth more. And so here as a board member, you will probably work very closely with the VC as well as with the founder and founding team in order to create this additional value. This might mean to certainly increase revenues, either with new product innovation, with new customers, or land and expand, if you're in a B2B environment where you increase your customer pools of revenues and help here. And then, of course, if you're a highly growing FinTech scale-up, for example, normally you're going through multiple rounds. So you might be at Series A initially, then you move to Series B, Series C, and so on. And at every single stage, customer and also investor expectations increase. And so you as a board member will probably engage with investors. And so you need to give them the confidence that when they invest, their money will be looked after well, because there's a strong governance model in place.
Another question popped in my head, but first let's look at, we are now at a pre-IPO stage.
Yes, a pre-IPO stage, that's a very interesting stage. So I've been at a private equity-owned company, which was deciding, should we go down, it's called a dual track process. So do you want to sell to a trade buyer, or do you want to prepare for an IPO? And what we see in practice is most companies do both. They prepare for both and then see what works better. Where do they get the highest valuation if an exit is, the goal of the founders or the investors who have been backing the firm. And so at this stage, if you want to be positioned for both potential outcomes, the more demanding one, of course, is the public one. If you go public, because then your board must be ready for public governance, being a listed board member. And so you would typically add at this stage, when assuming that your board so far had people who had experience being a private board member, you would add people who have got expertise being on public boards and who understand how to chair a nomination committee, a remuneration committee, audit or risk committee. And of course, you would need a SIT, a senior independent director, and of course, a chair who will be respected in a public environment and therefore help your IPO becoming a success.
And two questions, I don't even know, so many things pop now in my head. You mentioned you're, of course, particularly active in the FinTech cycle. What you described, do you think that's universal also across other industries?
I do think it is actually, Sabine. So, you're totally right. I only work in fintech and financial services, but this journey which I described is sector agnostic. So any startup, any scale up, at least in all technology-driven sectors, but even I think if it's not tech-driven, any growing company would normally go through these stages. And so it would very much apply really being sector-agnostic advice.
Why do these stages matter? And, there are so many people who want to sit on boards, and they might think, it's easier if I sit on a board of a startup or a scale-up than on a FTSE-listed board. Why do these stages matter? And can someone who comes out of a large organization who wants to start his going plural, can they really add value to a startup and a scale-up? Do they understand this environment?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think it is not easy for somebody, let's say, who has managed 10,000 people, in a large bank, then come into a startup with 10 people, and add value without killing the innovation and the fast movement and agility of a startup. So you're totally right that there is a challenge to do that correctly. And that's, of course, one thing which we at FINTECH Circle, we run a FINTECH Circle board program, which we train people on how to do that. But I would say my advice would be, the first thing is to be aware on the stage. And as you said correctly, working with startups, it's really about much more being hands-on. It is very exciting because a startup finds its way. It's like a child being growing up.
Learning to walk.
Exactly, learning to walk. Yeah. And so it is a very exciting phase. And so it is a phase where I think lots of finance experts get lots of pleasure out of helping, giving back, the new generation of building something new from scratch. I think the more you move up towards later stage companies, the more governance becomes, of course, more important because you've got multiple stakeholders and investors who will measure KPIs every single board meeting to ensure that their go-to-market strategy works and revenues grow explosively at this stage to ensure that they have a nice exit after a few years. On being on a public board, you have got much more regulatory responsibility, especially when it's a regulated entity. And so you might talk to the regulators, much more frequently. You will have your annual reporting cycles, so your half-yearly reporting cycles to comply with. And so here, more knowledge about governance is required from potential board members. But I would say what I often see is if somebody is flexible to learn and try new things in terms of personality, being curious, you can adjust your personality and your style to each environment. But I think it's key to be able to listen well, and to be humble, to learn by listening, by observing, and to also learn when not to interfere or when or how to interfere well, because you want to always be seen adding value, and you don't want to be seen as somebody just blocking things or just being a naysayer. Or you want to be a positive influence in entrepreneurs' life by helping them to overcome challenges. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I lost count on how many times I heard that board members in listed organizations feel stifled by all the regulatory requirements. And so the desire to add something to a young company where it's still this entrepreneurial spirit and you can be hands-on and do something and you can see an impact of your advice and your actions. Of course, it is exciting.
Yes, and maybe what I should say is, that the private market, what we have seen across, again, it's sector agnostic across all technology sectors, is that the private market has expanded rapidly. So here in the UK alone, we have got more than 30 fintech companies, which we still refer as scale-ups, but they are unicorns. They are worth more than £1 billion in valuation. And of course, across Europe, we've got even more of these large private fintech unicorns. And they are bigger, than many FTSE 250 companies, in fact. So it is very interesting that lots of large private companies have not yet gone public, but they are more successful, you could argue, than large listed companies. And in terms of fees, I guess you hinted on that, or I guess financial compensation, I would say, of course, you would get normally paid more being on a listed board. However, if you join the right startup or the right scale, and in addition to your fee, you might get options or shares, and then this company becomes a unicorn, that's probably the best portfolio company in your whole portfolio, because you would have made, millions. Let's say if you would have joined a Revolut, as a board advisor when they were in their first year as a startup, so we see there's a huge opportunity as board members to add value across the whole life cycle of these technology companies.
Chrissy, that's interesting. I did not know that we really have 30 fintech companies at unicorn stage. That's amazing.
It is incredible, and these are some of them, of course, are household names such as Revolut, Starling Bank, Monzo, Alika Bank, is well known. It's an SME banking platform. So we have got, more than 30 companies worth than 1 billion.
Wow.
And some of them are worth more than 10 billion. If they would be listed, they would make the FTSE 50.
Yeah, tremendous. So what does it take? What does someone have to do in order to get a seat on such a board, on the board of a scale-up? What's the process?
I would say there are two ways in. The first one is networking in the fintech sector, because it's I would say 2/3 of all positions are still being driven by knowing, which companies are hiring, which companies are looking for extending the board, so just starting the first board as well. So it's really about building your network, and this you can do this also in general by attending fintech conferences, often very well attended and very interesting, not only for meeting other attendees, but of course meeting the speakers and learning about fintech trends and what the key topics are in the fintech sector, and also getting to know fintech companies and what they're working on. So I would say that's one step. The second step, of course, is getting to know headhunters, but it's very important to meet those headhunters, to get yourself on their database, to ensure that they have your CV ready, that they understand what value you can add, because once they get a search, they go through their database and through the people they've met recently to develop their long list of candidates. And then, of course, this long list gets shortened down to a short list, together with their customer. And then ultimately their client interviews the shortlisted candidates. And so in order to be inside the funnel, which headhunters use, it's important to understand who are the right headhunters who operate in this financial services and specifically fintech area, which of course the headhunters really like as well, because there are more mandates being gained by working with those fintech companies. And so it is, yes, it's really about putting yourself out there. So I would say for any aspiring nets or any net who likes to add an additional portfolio.
But I would like to say, Susanne, I think that is not only true for fintechs. The two routes you have described, I think, are true for any industry. Yes. If I get asked, I also tell people it's still so important to be known in the networking route is still the safest and fastest route to get a seat on the table. And then the second, that you are also known to the headhunters in your chosen area. So absolutely, hello listeners. Yeah, this is true for any industry. Yeah, not just the fintech area.
You're right, Sabine. Maybe one thing I should say as well is, we always, when we talk to fintech CEOs, we always ask them, especially when they pitch to us, to our investor network for funding, we always say, so what is your elevator pitch? How would you summarize why we should invest in you based on your company and your opportunities ahead? And we as board members also need to have an elevator pitch. We need to understand how to explain who we are, where we can add value within a minute. And that's really hard, for somebody who has worked 30 years in a certain industry to be able to summarize your life and how it adds value to somebody else within a minute is not easy to do. And so I think we ourselves, we have to practice and almost think about, how can we summarize our life in a short period of time when we actually meet somebody who is looking for a board member and they want to evaluate, where we could add value.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Very wise words here. Sadly, I look at the clock and we have to come to an end. So what do you think, Susanne? What are the 3 things our listeners should take away from this podcast?
So the first takeaway is that the fintech sector and equally all technology sectors are a great opportunity for any board member or for any aspiring board member to really add value. And it doesn't mean that you need to be a tech expert. That's really important to understand. If you are a legal expert, a compliance, a risk management, go-to-market expert, that's often what those companies need, because technology knowledge, they have got enough themselves, so you just need to like the technology and appreciate and see the opportunity, but you don't need to code and you don't need to be an AI or a agentic AI domain expert to join one of those boards. Number 2, I would say the second takeaway is it requires work to join a board. So it doesn't happen by accident, but you need to have almost a plan in place how to put yourself out there, how to network with other board members, other peers in your chosen field, and also how to get to know the headhunters who work in your industry. And I would say the third one is to see it as a long-term enrichment of your life. And I think that's an important one, because all of us are growing older, hopefully, and we will have longer career paths, but we don't want to work full-time anymore at some stage. And so to have a portfolio of part-time roles, of board roles, can be very, very exciting, very rewarding, and I think allows all of us to contribute to hopefully a better future and to give back of the experience which we have gained during our executive careers. And I think ultimately it's lots of fun. It's really enjoyable. It's fun. And so it's a great way, I think, to design one's own career, being a portfolio career focused person on the right company boards.
Fantastic. Susanne, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thanks so much, Sabine. It was lovely to talk to you, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to learn more about the work we do at Better Boards, if you have any ideas for topics you would like to see covered, please do get in touch. You can best reach us at info@better-boards.com. Thank you for listening.